Most people come to weddings for love. I came to watch my brother marry a woman who mocked our dying grandfather and never knew I owned the estate she wanted to demolish. My name is Logan Merrick. I used to be a journalist. I live quietly now. But that weekend silence wasn't an option. Because some legacies aren't inherited. They're defended. And this time the quiet one was ready to speak. I hadn't been back to Vermont in years. The air was cooler than I remembered, cleaner too, but it didn't stop my palms from sweating as I pulled up to the Merrick house. It sat at the edge of a sloping hill, white-trimmed windows glinting in the late afternoon sun. It was a place full of echoes and ghosts, the kind that don't creak floors but stare from old photos and your own reflection. My name is Logan Merrick. I'm 34 and live alone in a tiny apartment in Portland, Oregon. Used to be a journalist. Now I mostly write under other people's names. After what happened in 2017, I left the industry and never looked back. Until now. Evan, my younger brother by 3 years, was getting married, and the wedding in all its grand spectacle was happening here at the old family estate. Evan had always been the golden boy, smooth, confident, always the center of any room. He followed the traditional path: law school partnerships, social clubs. I followed the silence. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward the front lawn. Guests were gathering under a white tent where staff served hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. Laughter echoed and violins played something light and expensive. I saw my parents, Patrick and Helen, mingling by the roses. Mom waved her smile, too quick to hold. Dad gave me the kind of nod you give a waiter. Then there she was, Madison Lang, the bride, tall, sharp-featured in a pale pink cocktail dress that looked more couture than celebration. She was surrounded by her bridesmaids, one hand holding a champagne flute, the other gesturing toward my grandfather, Walter Merrick. My grandfather sat near the fountain. His hands, once steady enough to build airplanes, trembled slightly as he adjusted his cap. He wore his best blazer, the one with the veteran's pin. Alone. No one seemed to notice him. I was too far to hear every word, but I didn't need subtitles. Madison's voice, clear as day, rang out with practiced disdain. Honestly, I don't know why we're still doing events here. This place looks like a relic from a forgotten America. That old man sitting there like he owns it. She let out a dry laugh. My stylist said he looks like he walked off a Civil War reenactment set. Some of her friends laughed uncomfortably. One tried to say something about tradition, but Madison cut her off with a shrug. If it weren't for Evan, I'd have chosen any venue but this. You can't build a legacy in a museum. I froze. My jaw tightened. I looked at Grandpa. He hadn't flinched. Either he didn't hear her or he'd heard worse and chosen not to care. But I cared. The way she looked at him like he was dust on her designer heels made my fists clench in my pockets. A few guests looked around, clearly catching the tone. One older woman sipped her wine a bit too fast. Another man raised an eyebrow and turned away. Madison spotted me then. Our eyes met. Her smile flickered, polite, shallow. She leaned into Evan's arm, whispered something. Evan glanced my way and nodded once, as if confirming I had indeed shown up. I walked past them, ignoring the looks, and made my way toward Grandpa. He looked up and smiled. That smile had carried me through harder days than most people ever live. "Hey, kid," he said as I sat beside him on the stone bench. "Hey, Grandpa, you holding up?" He nodded, eyes still on the crowd. They all looked the same, pretty on the outside, anxious underneath. I laughed softly. "How are you feeling about all this?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small mint tin. He offered me one. I took it. "It's a wedding. They're supposed to be about love, right?" His tone was light, but I saw the weight in his eyes. Before I could say more, Helen appeared. She smiled at Grandpa, gently adjusting his collar. "They're starting the welcome speeches soon. Logan, why don't you freshen up and join the main tent?" I nodded and stood up. "Grandpa, I'll be back." He waved me off. "Don't worry about me. I've got the best seat in the house." As I walked toward the guest house to drop my bag, my eyes drifted once more to Madison. She was laughing again, already moving on, probably unaware of the bruise she'd left on something she never cared to understand. But I understood, and I remembered. I had come here for a wedding. But now I wasn't sure what I'd stay for. The guest room hadn't changed much. Same faded wallpaper, same creaky window latch. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dust particles dancing in a sheet of afternoon light. My thoughts were heavier than the suitcase I hadn't really unpacked. It always came back to Evan. He had been the chosen one since we were kids. If I got a B, he got an A. If I won a debate trophy, he made captain of the debate team and got his photo in the paper. Our father, Patrick, didn't hide his preference. He was a numbers man, a financial advisor who believed in results image and upward mobility. Evan was his mirror. I was a shadow. I remembered the time I told him I wanted to study journalism. He had scoffed, poured himself a scotch, and muttered something about starving writers. He never asked to read my articles, not even when one of them made national news. It was Grandpa Walter who clipped out that article and mailed it to me with a handwritten note. He underlined the headline and wrote, "Proud of you, even if the world forgets to say it." He had always been my anchor, quiet, steady, never one to offer advice unless you asked. But when he spoke, it stuck. There was a day years ago, right after college, when we were rebuilding the garden shed. I was covered in sweat and frustration. I had just lost a job offer after a background check pulled up something stupid I had written in a college blog. Walter didn't say much, just handed me a glass of lemonade and said, "One day you'll be the one holding this place together. Not because they ask you to, because you'll know why it matters." I didn't understand it then. Maybe I still didn't, but it echoed now louder than ever. In 2017, everything changed. I had uncovered a story about a local senator funneling money through fake veterans programs. It was airtight, backed by interviews and documents, but the blowback was brutal. Legal threats, anonymous messages, a smear campaign. My editor pulled the piece after political pressure. My name was blacklisted. I was labeled a liar by the same people who knew I was telling the truth. After that, I walked away, changed my number, left DC and moved to Portland, took ghostwriting gigs, laid low. My parents called less. Evan didn't call at all. Walter wrote letters. I kept everyone. Now here I was, sitting on a bed in the same house that once felt like a safe harbor, wondering if I'd been wrong to come back. I looked out the window and saw Evan laughing with Madison by the gazebo. They looked perfect. Picture book perfect. But I knew that story. I'd written too many fake endings to believe in happy ones at face value. The door creaked. My mother peeked in. "Logan, honey, we're heading to the garden in 15. There's a group photo before dinner." I nodded. "I'll be there." She smiled softly, lingered like she wanted to say more, then left. I stood up and went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and stared at myself in the mirror. Same eyes. A little more tired, but still here. The past doesn't go away, it just waits. And sometimes it waits in your childhood home wearing a wedding dress you didn't expect. The sun dipped lower as I stepped outside, casting long shadows over the garden. The photo session was a blur. Fake smiles, stiff poses, hands brushing against arms that barely tolerated one another. I stood next to Evan while he beamed his hand wrapped around Madison's waist. She didn't even look in Grandpa's direction. Later, after most guests had drifted inside for the cocktail hour, I found Grandpa sitting under the oak tree. He looked tired more so than earlier. His breath was shallow, his gaze unfocused. For a moment, I felt a pang of panic. "Are you okay?" He nodded slowly but didn't speak. That night, as dinner wrapped up, Mom pulled me aside. Her tone was low, her eyes puffy. "Your grandfather. He's been declining fast. He refused chemo last year, said he didn't want to spend what time he had in a hospital bed." I stared at her. "You didn't tell me." "He asked us not to. Said he didn't want pity, just wanted to be here while he still could." My chest tightened. Everything about the weekend suddenly felt heavier. The next morning, I went out to the old storage shed behind the house. It was where Grandpa kept his books, his tools, the remnants of a life spent building and fixing. He was already inside when I arrived, sifting through a dusty box. "Help me with these," he said without looking up. We spent the next hour sorting old manuals, photo albums, and stacks of paper tied with brittle string. I found a copy of my high school essay printed in the local paper. He had circled my byline in red pen. Then at the bottom of a drawer, something caught my eye. A sealed manila envelope labeled with my name, Grandpa. He turned, saw what I held, and exhaled through his nose. "You were bound to find it." I opened it slowly. Inside was a document yellowed, slightly notarized. A will, dated April 2021. It named me as the sole heir of Merrick House and all its grounds. I looked at him stunned. Why me? He didn't answer right away, just looked around the room as if seeing the past and the future in the same breath. "Because one day they'll all forget what this place stood for, but you won't. You never did." He gave me a half smile. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do." I folded the paper back into the envelope, my hands trembling just enough to notice. I didn't ask more questions. I knew he wouldn't say anything else. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the old twin bed, the envelope on the nightstand, and thought about everything Grandpa had built, everything my family had overlooked, and everything Madison had mocked. It wasn't just a house, it was a history. And suddenly it was mine. The day faded into evening and the garden lights flickered on one by one. It should have felt festive, but the air was too rehearsed. Madison had turned the West Garden into a stage for her bachelorette soiree, rebranded as a sophisticated cocktail mixer. Strings of fairy lights wove through the hedges and a string quartet played covers of pop songs like they were Bach. I stood near the French doors, sipping a ginger ale and watching her work the crowd like a politician. She was laughing too loudly, posing for photos and offering perfectly timed compliments that never quite reached her eyes. As I stepped out into the garden path, I heard her voice was above the background music. "After the honeymoon, we're gutting this entire place." Madison's tone was casual but firm. "I want open concept, modern lighting, clean lines. This house has good bones but feels like a retirement home for dusty furniture." One of her friends nodded eagerly. "Evan's totally on board with that, right?" Madison waved her hand dismissively. "Evan's fine. He just doesn't get aesthetic. He thinks keeping his grandfather's vinyl collection makes him cultured." Bless his heart. They all laughed. I didn't. I scanned the garden and found Grandpa Walter sitting alone again, this time at the far end of the lawn, half lit by a hanging lantern. His plate was untouched. No one sat beside him, not even my parents. My jaw clenched. The pit in my stomach tightened. All these people floating around their champagne flutes had no clue what this place meant, and they didn't care to learn. Inside, near the fireplace, I overheard another conversation. Patrick, my father, was speaking with Adam Lang, Madison's father. Both had the same manicured calmness of men who'd spent decades negotiating contracts. Patrick was nursing a bourbon, Adam Ever, the businessman, leaned in. You know, Patrick, a merger between the Merrick and Lang names could be more than symbolic. There's potential for investment alignment. Real estate, private equity, even charitable ventures. Patrick gave a polite laugh. I appreciate the sentiment, Adam, but this house isn't exactly a revenue stream. Adam smiled. Maybe not yet, but with the right vision it could be. Rebuild it as a venue. Madison's already got a list of people who'd pay top dollar for weddings here. My father hesitated, swirling the bourbon in his glass. That sounds ambitious. Adam shrugged. Evan's smart. He sees opportunity where others see sentiment. I stepped back, fading into the hall before either of them noticed me. My pulse pounded in my ears. So that was the plan. Sell the past for profit, strip it of its soul, and call it legacy. Later that night, I helped Grandpa back to his room. He said little, just gripped my hand a moment longer than usual before letting go. I closed his door quietly, then stepped out into the corridor. The laughter from the garden still floated in through the windows, disconnected from everything that mattered. I didn't sleep much. Just sat on the edge of the bed with the will still tucked under a stack of old magazines. This wasn't just about a house anymore, it was about memory, and who had the right to erase it. I woke before sunrise. The house was still and silent, but my mind was restless. I stepped outside into the dewy morning and followed the gravel path toward the edge of the estate where the fee hugged the ground like a second skin. That's when I saw her, standing beside a rusted gate in a black jacket, coffee cup in hand, hair tucked into a knit beanie. Rachel Dugan. She didn't smile, but her eyes lit up in that way I remembered. Didn't expect to see you here, she said. Same. We stood for a moment just looking. She nodded toward the tree line. Walk with me, I followed. The path was familiar, though the years had added more cracks. We walked in silence for a while until she spoke again. I heard about your grandfather. He's not doing great. She nodded, then paused. I'm here on assignment. I stopped. Rachel, it's not what you think. I didn't come for dirt. I came because something's off. Lang Group's name came up in a series of land transactions flagged by a watchdog team. Your family's estate popped up 3 times in 6 months. I blinked. What do you mean, popped up? She pulled a folder from her shoulder bag and handed it to me. Inside were copies of property documents. Some bore Evan's name, others listed shell companies I didn't recognize, all dated within the last year. These aren't transfers of ownership yet, but someone is setting up for it. Quietly. My hands tightened around the pages. Rachel kept her voice low. You said you were out of the game, but you've still got instincts. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think this mattered. I looked at the dates. One was stamped just a week after Grandpa's latest hospital visit. Another had Madison's digital signature on a consulting proposal. Why would Evan need to funnel anything? We have the will. Grandpa made it clear. Rachel shrugged. Maybe he doesn't know. Or maybe he does and thinks it won't matter once the ink dries. We stopped near the pond and I sat on a bench. Why are you helping me? She hesitated. Because you used to be the guy who dug until it hurt. And because this place, it's not just land, it's someone's story. I looked out over the mist-covered water. A duck cut across the surface, leaving quiet ripples behind. What would you do? Start with the land registry. Talk to the county clerk, cross-reference signatures. If something's been forged or pushed through under pressure, it'll leave a trace. I nodded slowly. Rachel stood, dusted off her jeans. I'm staying in town for a few days, room 12 at the Timberline Motel. You still eat bagels at sunrise, only if they're warm. She smiled this time for real. then walked back through the fog. I stared at the folder in my lap, my brother's name. Madison's. My grandfather's land. I had thought the past was painful enough, but maybe the real damage hadn't even begun. I didn't go back inside right away. I sat under the oak tree behind the garden until the sun fully broke through the mist. Birds chirped like nothing was wrong in the world. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt that way. By noon, I was in town. The sheriff's office was on Main Street, wedged between a diner and a hardware store that smelled like fresh lumber. Dale Patterson greeted me with a skeptical smile, arms crossed over his uniformed chest. Logan Merrick, as I live and breathe. To what do we owe the pleasure? I held up the folder Rachel had given me. Need a favor? Off the record. He raised an eyebrow but led me into his office. Once the door closed, I handed him the documents and watched his face carefully. He skimmed eyes, narrowing. These are recent. Who gave you this friend? Journalist. She's legit. Dale leaned back, tapping the folder. You think someone's trying to transfer your grandfather's land illegally? I don't know what I think yet. That's why I'm here. He stood and pulled open a drawer, retrieving a thick binder. County land transactions. He laid it next to the folder, flipping to the most recent section. After 20 minutes of cross-referencing, he sighed. Well, hell. What? He turned the binder toward me. One of the documents Rachel gave me was indeed filed, but not under my grandfather's name. This is a power of attorney form, executed 2 months ago, supposedly signed by Walter Merrick, naming Evan as the acting agent for all property decisions. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. Walter doesn't even know about this. He would have told me. Dale shook his head slowly. Unless he never saw it. Could have been slipped in front of him with other paperwork, or forged. Is that signature real? He looked closer. It's clean, too clean. I can get it analyzed, but that takes time. Meanwhile, this document's on file and active, which means Evan could legally transfer the property if no one contests it. Yeah, especially if your grandfather's health deteriorates further. I sat back, reeling. Dale leaned forward, softer now. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but you're smart, Logan. You know what to do. I nodded slowly, folding the documents back into my bag. Thanks, Dale. And please don't mention this to anyone. Not yet. You have my word. I left the station and walked aimlessly for a while. The town hadn't changed much. Same brick storefronts, same old folks waving from porches. But everything felt different now. Tilted. Back at the estate, the rehearsal dinner was being set up under a massive white canopy. I passed servers unloading wine crates and caterers arranging centerpieces. No one noticed me slip inside. Upstairs, I knocked on Grandpa's door. He was napping in his recliner, a book on his chest. I didn't wake him, just stood there for a long minute watching his chest rise and fall. He looked smaller somehow, frailer, and yet something about him still held the shape of strength. I stepped out quietly and made my way to the attic. The trunk that held family documents was still there, dusty and sealed with a rusted latch. I dug until I found what I needed. Grandpa's old signature on legal forms, letters, birthday cards. I scanned each one with my phone, creating a digital trail. If this was going to become a fight, I needed more than just good intentions. I wasn't ready to confront Evan, not yet. But I could feel the edges closing in. If he wanted a quiet takeover, he was going to get a loud reminder that not everything could be bought or stolen. Some things had to be earned, and some lines once crossed left scars that never faded. The lights from inside flickered against the windows, blurred by a light mist forming over the lawn. I stood motionless on the back porch, trying to make sense of the storm building inside me. The estate had always carried echoes, but tonight they were louder than ever. When I finally stepped back into the house, the hallway was quiet. Soft music still drifted from the parlor, laughter echoing faintly behind closed doors. I moved toward the kitchen, needing something, anything, to anchor myself. Water, maybe, or a moment of clarity. Instead, I found Evan leaning against the counter, a half-empty tumbler in hand. "You following me now?" he asked without turning. I wasn't, just thirsty. He took a sip and looked over his shoulder. His face was calm, too calm. "You know, for someone who walked away from this family, you sure picked a dramatic time to come back." I ignored the bait. "Why did you do it, Evan?" He raised an eyebrow. "Be specific. I've done a lot of things lately. The power of attorney, the shell companies, the backdoor land deals. You really think you can pull all of that off without anyone noticing?" He smirked, then walked past me to the living room. I followed. The dim chandelier light caught his profile as he set his drink down. No one noticed because no one cared. Not until now. "You think that makes it right? I think it makes it efficient. And you're still playing the wounded artist, pretending your exile gives you some moral superiority." I didn't flinch. He wanted a reaction. I wasn't going to give him one. "This house belongs to Grandpa. It's not yours to manipulate." He leaned closer. "It's going to belong to Madison and me, legally, soon. You think a piece of paper from 2 years ago will stop that? She's using you." His jaw tightened for a second, but then the smile returned. "She believes in vision, something you never had." Before I could respond, Madison walked in, arms wrapped in a silk shawl, lips already curled in a smile. Well, isn't this a testosterone-fueled reunion? Neither of us spoke. She poured herself a drink like she owned the place already, then sauntered over. "Logan, let me be clear. The world you and your grandfather romanticized, it's dead. This estate with its peeling wallpaper and old charm. It's a blank canvas, and I intend to turn it into something beautiful." "A gallery?" I asked, voice flat. "Exactly. Contemporary. Sharp. A space that elevates the Lang name and brings culture to this forgotten town." "And Grandpa?" She waved a hand. "Walter will be comfortable. We'll keep the library, maybe, for nostalgia." My fists clenched, but I kept my voice even. "You have no idea what this place means. And you, Logan, have no idea how to let go." She snapped, glass tapping against marble. Then a voice, quiet but cutting, entered the room. "That's enough." We all turned. Walter stood in the doorway, robe draped over his frail frame, eyes sharper than they'd been all week. "It's late. Go to bed." Madison looked irritated but didn't argue. Evan hesitated, then nodded and followed her out. I stayed. Walter walked in slowly and took the chair by the fireplace. I sat across from him. "You heard every word he said," softly. "I've seen this coming, just not so soon." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it had to reveal itself. People show their true selves when they think no one's watching." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the antique clock above the mantel. "Do you regret leaving the house in my name?" I asked quietly. "No. I regret not teaching you earlier how to fight for it." I looked into the flames and thought about everything that had led us here. Walter leaned back, closing his eyes. "Tomorrow's a long day. You'll need your strength." He didn't say goodnight. He didn't have to. I helped him to his feet and watched as he shuffled down the hallway, each step slower than the last. When he was gone, I stayed a little longer, surrounded by the ghosts of memory and the weight of a war that had already begun. By the time the first cars rolled up the gravel driveway, the Merrick estate had been completely transformed. White roses adorned every railing, candles lined the walkways, and a polished string quartet rehearsed beneath a linen canopy. Workers bustled with clipboards and headsets, adjusting floral arrangements, positioning cameras, aligning angles. The air buzzed not with celebration but with performance. The Lang family spared no expense. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a declaration. Madison had turned the day into a production of curated aesthetics, sponsored wine, and magazine-ready poses. Even the weather felt orchestrated. I walked the long corridor from the East Wing, passing unfamiliar faces in expensive cologne and louder laughter. It smelled like money or desperation. Hard to tell the difference anymore. Outside, the media tent near the entrance brimmed with photographers and local reporters. Lang Group PR was in full swing, handing out carefully worded press kits about the joining of two legacies. It read more like a merger announcement than a wedding invitation. I skirted the noise and drifted around the back of the estate near the old stone path Walter had laid by hand when I was a boy. Each step brought back moments. Him in overalls bent over with a level, cursing softly. Me handing him stones. Neither of us speaking much, just working. The koi pond still shimmered beside the oak grove. It had been cleaned, reshaped slightly, but the stones were the same. I sat on the low wall for a moment and watched the fish move slowly beneath the surface. I had never realized how quiet the water had to be for the fish to rise. As I stood again, I noticed a boy, maybe 9 or 10, staring at the pond. He looked up and asked if there would be fireworks tonight. I told him no, but the stars would be out. He nodded, satisfied, then ran off toward the lawn. Inside, I found myself in the old dining hall, now converted into a waiting room for the wedding party. The oak table had been removed. In its place stood mirrored pedestals holding floral centerpieces taller than me. A woman in heels walked past, murmuring about lighting for golden hour. Near the staircase, I saw my mother, Helen, her hair perfectly styled, her pearl earrings glinting in the soft light. Her posture was regal even now. She greeted guests with warmth, but her eyes flicked toward me the moment I entered. She came to my side quickly. "You haven't said much today," she whispered. "Not much to say." She tilted her head, examining me. "If you're planning something, Logan, do it soon, before it's too late. You know I may not know every detail, but I know Evan, and I know your grandfather's heart. He trusted you with this place. Don't let that be wasted." Then, like nothing had happened, she returned to her guests, gliding effortlessly through the room. I stared after her, stunned by the clarity of her words. Back outside, the seats were filling. I slipped around the side of the house, pausing beneath the maple tree Walter planted for my grandmother in 1972. The plaque at its base had faded, but I traced the letters with my fingers. For Charlotte, who made this house a home. I heard my name. Turning, I saw Rachel. "You okay?" "Yeah, just needed air." She stepped closer, her voice low. "The press is focused on Lang, not you. If you do this now, they won't see it coming. Not yet. 1 more hour." We stood in silence. She squeezed my hand once, then returned to the crowd. The musicians shifted into the first notes of the prelude. The ceremony was moments away. I walked through the orchard again, the only part of the estate that still felt wild. Each tree bore apples not quite ripe. Walter had always said timing was everything. Pick too soon and you ruin the harvest. I reached into my jacket pocket. The will was still there. Smooth edges. Faint smell of cedar. Rachel's copy. The original locked in my car. From the distance, I heard the first notes of Vivaldi. Guests turned. Cameras rolled. It wasn't time yet, but it would be, very soon. The sun had fully risen when I found Walter sitting beneath the old oak tree at the far edge of the orchard. He wore his usual flannel shirt sleeves, rolled up hat tipped slightly forward to shield his eyes. I joined him without a word. He didn't look at me right away. Instead, he stared at the house, the soft movement of white decorations fluttering in the breeze. "Lot of noise for a wedding," he said finally. "It's a performance," I replied. He chuckled dry and short. "They always are." We sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the ceremony preparation muffled by distance and leaves. Then slowly he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small leather string. Attached to it was an old silver key, slightly tarnished. He placed it in my hand without looking. "That's for the safe box at Wellsburg Bank. Locker 107. What's inside? Things that matter. Documents, letters, proof of who owns what and why. You knew this day would come. I had hoped it wouldn't. But I'm not surprised it has." He finally looked at me then. His eyes were tired but clear. "You're not like them, Logan. That's why I chose you." I didn't respond. I didn't trust my voice. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to make noise to be heard. Just stand still when the storm comes. Let them see who built the house that shelters them." We sat a few minutes more. Then he rose slower than before and walked back toward the house. I watched until he disappeared behind the hedgerow. By late morning, I slipped out and drove into town. The Wellsburg branch was quiet old carpet muffling my steps as I approached the front desk. The attendant recognized the key and led me to the private vault room without a word. Inside locker 107, I found a folder marked only with my name. I opened it. Inside was the original notarized will dated March 14th, 2021, naming me as the sole heir of the estate. Alongside it was the deed to the property held in Walter's name until transfer. But it was the letter that stopped me. Written in Walter's steady hand, it read, "Logan. This house was built with more than wood. It was built with memory, with mistakes, with lessons we dared to pass on. I've seen men chase money and lose themselves. I've seen silence hold more truth than speeches. I chose you because you listened. I won't live forever. But legacy isn't about lifespan. It's about what stands when you're gone. And I trust you'll stand when it matters. Don't forget who you are, or where you came from. Walter." I folded the letter and slipped it inside my jacket. The bank manager smiled politely as I left, none the wiser of what had just shifted. Back at the estate, the ceremony had already begun. But I didn't go to the front lawn. Instead, I returned to the oak tree, sat beneath its shade, and waited. There were words that needed to be said, but only when it mattered most, and that moment was coming. The moment arrived with the sound of clinking glasses. The reception was in full swing, string lights flickering against the descending dusk, champagne flowing like water. Madison stood at the center of the crowd in her glittering gown, arm linked with Evans, smiling for 100 photographs. A hired MC took the microphone, inviting the guests to raise their glasses. He began to read a pre-written speech full of platitudes and rehearsed laughter. The usual closing thank you was moments away. I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said calmly, taking the microphone from his hand. I saw the MC hesitate but then nod, backing away with practiced discretion. Madison's eyes narrowed. Evan's expression was unreadable. Walter, seated near the head table, watched me with a quiet stillness. "I'll keep this brief," I began, my voice steady. "But some truths matter more than timing." There was a low murmur among the guests. Confused glances exchanged. I pulled the folder from my jacket. The original documents, the deed and the notarized will. My grandfather, Walter Merrick, has owned this estate since 1968. Earlier this year, he legally named me the sole heir to Merrick House and its surrounding lands. Here is the notarized will dated March 14th, 2021. Here is the deed affirming full ownership. The murmurs grew louder. Cameras turned. Furthermore, I have reason to believe there was an attempt to fraudulently alter these rights through the use of medical coercion and falsified documents. My brother Evan, alongside his new wife Madison, had intentions to shift ownership for personal gain. The silence that followed was deafening. Evan stepped forward, his voice sharp. "You think this is the place for that? You're ruining their day. I'm protecting what was never theirs to take." Madison scoffed, laughing bitterly. "This rundown manor, you can have it. I was going to turn it into something useful." "Like a gallery?" I asked. "A vanity project built on a stolen foundation." She turned to Evan. "Do something." But Evan stayed frozen. I turned to the crowd. This estate wasn't meant to be flipped, sold, or repackaged. It was meant to be preserved, not for profit, for memory. From the back, Adam Lang stepped forward, expression grim. "Lang Group no longer supports this union financially. Effective immediately." Patrick's face went pale. Madison looked between them, confusion blooming into fury. "You can't be serious." Walter finally spoke. "He is." His voice was soft, but it carried across the crowd. "Logan has my blessing. Always did." I handed the documents to the family lawyer, positioned discreetly in the audience. The man nodded, understanding the weight of what had just transpired. Guests began whispering, some already walking away. Reporters scribbled, lenses focused. The reception hadn't ended, but it was over. I stepped off the platform and walked toward Walter. He smiled faintly. "Took you long enough. Better late than never." He nodded once. "Let's go sit. These people are about to lose their appetite." We left the crowd behind, side by side, as the world we knew finally shifted into place. The morning after the wedding was gray and unusually quiet. Rain had rolled in sometime before dawn, casting a damp hush over the world, as if even nature needed a moment to process everything that had happened. Walter and I ate breakfast in silence. He buttered toast with the same steady hand he once used to hammer fence posts, while I stared into a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. Rachel had already gone back to her office. Her article had been published hours after the wedding ended. By sunrise, the Lang Group's press team was in crisis mode, dodging calls from outlets across the East Coast. Social media had exploded. Hashtags bearing Madison and Evan's names trended with the kind of fury that made reputations vanish overnight. Walter flipped through the newspaper, pausing when he got to the editorial section. "They got it mostly right," he said, sliding it across the table. I scanned the article. They had framed it as a cautionary tale of greed, legacy, and the resilience of memory. Not bad, all things considered. Around noon, Dale Patterson dropped by. The sheriff looked tired but satisfied. He handed me a folder with photocopies of the forged documents, now verified by the state's forensic handwriting experts. "We're moving forward with charges," he said. "Coercion, forgery, attempted fraud. Possibly more, depending on what else we dig up." "Thanks, Dale, for everything." "You did the hard part, Logan. You stood up. That counts for something." He nodded toward Walter. "You all right, old man?" Walter gave him a tired smile. "Better than I deserve." Dale chuckled, tipped his hat, and left. That afternoon, a courier delivered a letter from Evan's law firm, official notice of his suspension pending a full ethics investigation. I tossed it into the growing stack of documents on the desk. Patrick called, but I let it go to voicemail. Later that day, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patrick standing there holding a box of Walter's old records and a face full of guilt. "I didn't know what they were planning," he said. "But you let them near him. That was enough." He hesitated. "I'm sorry. For everything, for the way I treated you, for choosing silence over you." Walter walked into the room then. He looked at his son for a long time. Then, with a slow nod, he took the box from Patrick's hands. "Come in if you're staying for supper." Patrick blinked, nodded once, and stepped inside. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. That night, the three of us ate together, quiet but not cold. The TV played some old black and white Western in the background. I caught Walter smiling once or twice. After dinner, I stepped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving everything slick and shining under the porch light. Rachel joined me, handing me a glass of wine. "It's strange," she said. "What is? How something so rotten can still end in something that feels good. Not perfect, but good." I nodded. We stood in silence, the hum of the city far in the distance. The weight of years finally beginning to lift. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's shadow. I had faced down the ghosts, protected what mattered, and somehow found my way home. The first snow of December blanketed the hills outside Portland like a fresh start. Walter and I had moved into a modest cedar cabin not far from Forest Park, a place quiet enough to think, but not so remote that we felt disconnected. He spent most mornings on the porch, wrapped in a thick plaid blanket, sipping tea and watching the world soften under winter. I spent those same mornings writing. The book had come together faster than I expected. It wasn't a biography or exposé. It was a reflection, a story of legacy, family, swunts, and the voices we choose to protect. I titled it The Estate. It wasn't just about the property. It was about the weight it carried and the way that weight had shifted hands across generations. It was about the people who stayed and those who left, the ones who remembered and the ones who tried to rewrite everything. I wrote it for Walter. And for myself. Rachel helped with the edits, even convinced a publisher in Seattle to pick it up. The launch was quiet, held at a local bookstore with just enough seats filled to feel like a small reunion. Patrick came. He brought a framed photo of Walter from the 1960s, hammer in hand. Mid-construction on the Merrick House porch. "He would have been proud," Patrick said, voice cracking. "He was," I replied. Walter had passed a month before the book was published, peacefully in his sleep. The last thing he said to me was simply, "Keep telling the truth." Rachel and I visited his grave that afternoon. We stood beside a small headstone tucked under a sugar maple tree, the same kind he planted near the cabin. I placed the first copy of the book on the stone. "Thank you," I whispered. In the months that followed, the estate found its audience, not in sales charts but in letters, dozens of them, from readers who saw their own families in mine, who remembered grandfathers who kept the world spinning quietly, who understood the cost of silence. One woman wrote, "I read this with my father, who never talks about his past. He cried." Another said, "Thank you for reminding us that not all battles are loud. Some are fought in patience and paper." That winter, I finally understood what Walter meant. A legacy isn't in the size of a home or the number of people who know your name. It's in how fiercely you guard what matters, how gently you honor the people who raised you, and how bravely you face the ones who tried to rewrite you. And some inheritances aren't written in deeds or bank accounts. Some are sealed in memories, in quiet dinners, in the choice to speak up when it would be easier to stay quiet. So I wrote, and lived, and remembered. Because some stories aren't about revenge. They're about reclaiming what was never really lost, just hidden, waiting for the right person to return. There are legacies no contract can define. There are families worth saving, and there are people who seem silent. But they are the ones holding everything together. Never underestimate the quiet one. They might be the only thing keeping an entire family from falling apart. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about truth, legacy, and quiet strength.